Okay. Perfect. So I think we have some people registering now from the LinkedIn event. As you know, we always do like 2 events, one for the existing clients and then one that we advertise on LinkedIn. And yeah, they're just, I think, about there. And today we'll be talking about myths and fairy tales in pricing and revenue management, a little Christmas special, really about the common misconceptions in pricing and revenue management. As Ingo will explain a bit more in detail, this is not about, things that everyone knows, like your pricing is the biggest value lever, these types of things. It's really about more scientific view of looking at things and some misconceptions that even experts are still holding. So I think quite an interesting one for our audience to join this afternoon. Ingo, do you want to take us to the next page so I can give a quick introduction of us? Yeah, we made it a little Christmassy this time around. It's almost there. I hope everyone has already bought their presents. I personally need to get around to that today and on the weekend. But today, Ingo, our founder, will be giving this and hosting this webinar. He has over 12 years experience in pricing and revenue management and developed the Buynomics method. And myself, I'm head of sales at Buynomics, and I'm leading also the Buynomics content and insights, and worked in strategy consulting at BCG before. So yeah, with no further ado, Ingo, yeah, let's hear a little bit about the most common pricing misconceptions.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. And also have a Christmas coffee cup to get us in the proper mood here. All right, so also warm welcome from my side. So this is going to be the last webinar of this year. Have more webinars coming up next year, of course. Very excited to do this one with you. Christmas special. We'll talk a bit about myth in pricing. We have our list. If you think we missed anything or there's something else you find relevant, please write it into the comments, and very happy to discuss these at the end of the webinar. So without further, let's get started. And as Paul already said, we don't want to do like the usual lists of myth in pricing. If you Google pricing myth, lots of things will come up. Here we just screenshotted a few of these results, and we don't want to talk about these myths. I think most of you have seen them, heard about them. Things like the myth that that costs are really important, myth that small price changes have little impact. So I think the common note in most of these myths when you see these lists is that I think that they want to tell you that first, pricing is important, and second, that they want to like help you increase prices, because most of these myths move towards making aggregating support for price increases. This is not what we want to talk about, but we want to take a deeper look into things that are common within the pricing field and discuss these today. All right, so let's start with one that probably most of you have already seen, which is often used to motivate pricing as a topic. And it says, I think, there are different, if you look at the profit equation, there are different things that affect the profit equation: fixed costs, sales volumes, variable cost, and of course price. And usually it's put in a way that price is the most important lever. And of course, we also see that pricing is a key lever for profitability. But what I think most people are not aware of is that the underlying, often implicit assumption of this equation is that there are no price elasticities. So you get these massive advantages of a price change. They're just computed by increasing the price by 1%. without a sales reaction. And I think in our experience, and I would expect also in yours, that price elasticities can be very low, they can be high, but almost never do you have a price elasticity of 0. And this is the implicit assumption of this picture. But so we find that the message is correct, that pricing is important. It doesn't follow from this type of analysis at all. And I think most aren't really aware of this. So this is just the starting myth we want to point out here to get into the topic. So, but before we go into our original list, I think it's important to pause for half a second to think about what a myth actually is. And typically it's defined in the way that, and we just took a common definition here, an ancient story or set of stories, especially explaining the early history of a group of people or about natural events and facts. So they help people in a country or in a community or in a field, as here in pricing, to understand the foundations of that field. For example, in ancient Greek mythology, they explain why the sun moves around the earth, stuff like that. And it helps people understand. Maybe some of these myths aren't truly factual, as some discovered then later on, but they help explain the reality that a group of people lives in. And of course, we in pricing also have some of these myths. And here's our list of what we think are myths that aren't very, very helpful for making good pricing decisions. So, and I think the way we put our list here is a bit different from the list that we highlighted in the beginning of this webinar. So from our point of view, one myth is often costs don't matter for pricing. We'll show that they actually do. Pricing is all about value to the customer, the foundational statement, I would say, of value pricing. But it's very difficult to say who the customer actually is. Price elasticity, probably the most widespread tool in pricing, is often just given as a single number, -2, for example. But it's massively oversimplistic to work with a single number across different situations. And also what we find is that behavioral effects, behavioral pricing is a very important topic, of course, in pricing. And many of the insights come from very specific, I would say, laboratory situations where people were asked about their reactions in a very specific environment. And when we put that same, and then the results of that, something like good, better, best, and so on, is applied to reality, we often see that within the real environment, with the real complexity at a retailer, for example, things look very different from the clean laboratory situation. And these are the 4 things we want to talk about today. So let's start with the first one. I think we've had similar things in the past. If you have something like a demand function, and it doesn't really matter which one you have. So we have linear demand. So for every unit of price, for every unit that you increase your price, you lose the same number of sales units. So you have linear demand. And then if you use that equation, you see that in the profit optimum is half the cost. And then essentially you have this term here. And of course, in the optimal price, you have also the cost. So if, for example, costs increase in this example, so your costs are 100 euros and you sell at 200 euros, and if that's the optimal price, then your elasticity in this case is -2, and your cost increased by 10 euros from 100 to 110 euros, you would pass on, to stay at the profit optimal level, you would pass on half of the cost increase in this case. So that means that's a very simple calculation, but it highlights, of course, that costs are important. Whenever you have costs and they increase, then you need to consider how that affects your optimal pricing. The second example, value pricing. So usually the claim is, and we just took a typical definition here of value pricing. Value pricing is customer-focused pricing, meaning companies base their pricing on how much the customer believes a product is worth. And if we, just for convenience, essentially use the same demand function that we've had on the previous slide, it's not obvious who the customer is. Is it this one up here? Is it that one, or is it some average customer? This is not very clear. So already the foundational statement of value pricing is very tricky, because the customer doesn't exist. There's typically a distribution of customers. Some have a high willingness to pay, some have a lower willingness to pay, and which you need to focus on is not really clear. And even if some will say, okay, well, you can't apply that to the full population, you have to focus on subsegments, for example, but that doesn't really make the situation much better, because if you have looked at data from conjoint studies, from real transaction data and so on, you will always find that preferences. So if on these axes you have, for example, the willingness to pay for product A and for product B, you will always find something like this, where you have like some smooth distribution in customer preferences underlying the situation. And even if you then apply some segmentation where you have different customer segments, really the underlying data always looks like that. And introducing customer samples, customer segments is something that is done to make the data set more understandable for people. But often these segments don't really come from the data itself. And so there's no the customer. What there is the distribution in preferences. And it makes sense from a pricing perspective to take the reality of the situation as it is, and then look at how that what that means for your profit optimization, for example. So what would be the proper price for product A and product B? It doesn't make sense, and we can take a look at an example in a minute to oversimplify the situation, but it's much more helpful to look at the real distribution here that's underlying the situation. Another example I think that we find very relevant here is, and this is just an example of a behavioral pricing case. So here we're looking at a price threshold. So we have some chocolate snack that we're looking at. And essentially here, the data comes from something like a Garber-Granger survey. So where customers are asked if they would buy the snack at, let's say, what's that here? 45 cents, 50 cents, and so on, up to 90 cents, and then at €1 and past €1. And here it says what share of the customers would actually buy that snack. And important in this situation, people were just asked if they would buy that specific snack, and they didn't have alternative snacks. And when you do that, you always get like a very significant price threshold here, in this case at the €1 mark, where you lose something like 35% in sales as you go from 90 cents to €1. And then the demand curve flattens out afterwards. But what you see in reality, if you use that same snack and look at the actual sales data at different price points, you typically get something like this here. This is anonymized data, but it shows the general effect that we're also seeing in reality here. And you see that the price threshold, it doesn't disappear completely, but it disappears mostly. And that comes from the fact that if you put that one chocolate snack into the context of different products that people can buy, then the choice is not, do I buy this snack or do I not buy the snack? But the choice is more often, do I buy this snack or some other snack? And then the specific price threshold of that one chocolate snack in this case becomes less relevant. And this is an example of an effect that disappears, not completely, but mostly when you go from the clean laboratory situation to the reality at a retailer store where people can choose between different products and not just the one product that they're being asked about. Similar things you will see with, we all know this example of where when you sell 2 wine bottles, most customers purchase the cheaper one. If you add a third, more expensive wine bottle, then you see that some of the people who previously bought the cheap wine bottle now move to the middle wine bottle, and essentially demand is pulled up. This is also one example where you see that very clearly in a clean laboratory situation, but much less strongly in a real case where people can choose from dozens or hundreds of wines as they can in a store. So these effects, they exist, but they become distorted and much weaker in a real situation. And if you want to properly apply them, you need to be aware of these situations and understand how these effects play out in reality and not just in the clean laboratory situation. As a final example of a myth is price elasticity. I think that's one of our more favorite ones that we use quite often. Is usually when studies are conducted, the result is price elasticity. This product is elastic. It has a price elasticity of -4. This product is inelastic. It has a price elasticity of -1/2. Things like that. But in reality, and if we again use the example of a linear demand function, you see that the elasticity ranges from 0 at a very low price, high volume, to -1 somewhere in the middle, to -infinity at a very high price where demand goes to 0 in the end. So what's this product's price elasticity? It's not really clear because it can take any number between 0 and -infinity. So just reporting a single elasticity number can be very, very misleading because also elasticities already change quite a lot with typical price changes of, I don't know, 10, 20%. So it's really difficult to assign a single number to the situation. It's a bit like it's like half as good as a broken watch, right? A broken watch is correct twice a day. Broken elasticity is typically only correct in one specific situation. And let me just highlight this very quickly, if I can. Just 1 second. Paul, can you see my browser?
Yes, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So just as a very, very simple example, let's look at the case. So it's a very simple market. We're selling apples. We have one competitor who sells pears. The cost of a single apple is 50 cents, pear, same 50 cents. We sell at 130, competitor also 130, and we're looking at different prices. So between 50 cents and 2 euros, just to get an understanding of how that market works. And what we want to highlight is how price elasticities differ at different prices, and that it's not very helpful to just assign the single number to the situation. So here we have the demand function of the apple. So it's almost linear at the relevant range. Same for the peer here. We see the revenue curve. Could look at what happens if we go to the revenue optimum. We have the profit optimum. Of course, the profit optimum is at a bit higher price compared to the revenue optimum. And for this situation, we have the price elasticities, and you see here that the price elasticity ranges between -0.4 to -7. So that's quite a range between 50 cents and the 2 euros here, 190 here in the end. So it changes, and if you go from, let's say, 130, elasticity is -2.9 to 120, it goes to 2.4. So that's already quite a significant difference. And the implication about the profit optimal price is already strong, so that when if you go here, if the actual elasticity is minus 1.9 and you calculate with 2.9, that's a huge difference. Also, you only change the price by 20 cents. And also, if your competitor, let's say, goes down 20 cents, your elasticity goes from minus 2.9 to minus 3.3. So these numbers change a lot. And if you just use a single number, then you will most likely not make good predictions on how your market will react, and you will also not find the optimum. And this was just a simple example to highlight that it's often not very useful to just work with price elasticities. Let me go back to the presentation, if I find it. Or can you see it?
Now it's better. If you go to presentation mode, then it's perfect.
Okay. Now it works?
Yes.
Perfect. Yeah. So that was just a short look. It's into our solution that we use. We use a different technology to be able to model how elasticities really behave in a market, considering competitor price changes, own price changes, anything that might be relevant, to highlight the fact that it's one of the myths that are often implicitly used, that there's a single price elasticity that's useful for describing the dynamics in the market. So coming back to our original idea, so why are there these myths? They're used for the ancients, but also in I think in our field and many others, to as a point of orientation, to understand the world, to have simple heuristics and models to understand what's going on, and to have some rules to make decisions. But we think, and we highlighted this with these 4 examples, that many of the myths underlying the pricing field, constant elasticities, the focus on the customer in value-based pricing, the fact that often costs are not considered relevant, and the way that behavioral insights are used are not very helpful myth. And we think that now with technology that's becoming available, we have a proper substitute, and we should use it to make better decisions. And the tool that we're building here at Buynomics is just one example of a tool that can properly model these dynamics and then allow much better and more precise understanding of reality, and with that the ability to make better and more profitable decisions. Thank you for your time. Paul, I'll hand over to you to go to the questions.
Yeah, so if anyone has questions, so Mathieu asked if we can watch the replay, and we will send that out early next week, as always, by email. So check your inbox. Yeah, that's definitely something that we always do. In terms of any other content questions, I think Ingo, you hit all the nails on the head this time. So Shiraz is just asking, what's the main message in terms of pricing myths? So if you can summarize it maybe in one sentence for everyone, that'd be great.
Yeah, I think the main message is that many of the, I would say, the traditional pricing tools like price elasticities, value pricing, and so on, they oversimplify reality. And in decisions that where it makes a difference if you get the last 5 or 10% right. So if you have a margin of where an extra 2 or 3, 4 percentage points in margin matter, then you should not use these oversimplistic tools, but use the proper technology to make high precision decisions here.
All right. Yeah, I think that's a great takeaway. If you want to lead us to the next page, then we can also have a quick outlook in terms of what's coming up next. So obviously, it's the Christmas holiday coming up. So hopefully everyone has a nice and a relaxing time with their family. In the new year, we'll start again with pricing and revenue management with AI. We'll cover the right tools for your pricing from Excel to SaaS, key pricing methods, and then behavioral pricing. I think all of these came up today because I think there's myths in all of them, but it's definitely interesting to also see these topics individually. And if you want to join, just check your inbox and follow our LinkedIn page to be updated on the next webinars. I'm just quickly answering a question by Edu here, who's asking whether we also have customers in the used car market. We do have customers basically in a variety of different industries. And that's, I think, the beauty of our solution is that it does not only work in, for instance, the consumer goods industry or just the telco industry, but across industries. In the car space, we haven't had any customers yet, but I'm sure we could do it as well. Yeah, would be an interesting first use case to do. So yeah, with no further ado, thanks Ingo for this very interesting excursion on pricing myths. If you want to watch the recording, check your inbox, and if you want to follow us for the next webinars, do so on LinkedIn, and keep an eye on your inbox about the next webinar on pricing and revenue management with AI. So yeah, hopefully everyone has a good holidays, and we'll see you in the new year.
Yeah, thanks also from my side. Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we're looking forward to seeing you again in January for next webinars and else.
Great. Thanks, Ingo. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.